Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 54, and we're going to talk about math in philosophy, debate, and life. And I know that title might be off-putting, but to me, it's pretty cool. Anyway, this podcast is being uploaded on most of the major platforms, I guess. Just do a search and you'll find me, especially if a different platform is more convenient for you. Also, for episode topic ideas, I just pretty much troll on Twitter or X. But if you have a topic that you want my spin on, then you can just shoot me an email at subjectiveprofessor@gmail.com. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, X, if you want. I don't do a whole lot there. Just comment on other people's stuff. But anyway, so as far as math, once upon a time, I was going to be a math teacher in high school. And in order to do that, you had to take a lot of math classes in college, but I was more interested in, creating problems for myself, I guess. But in any case, math as a whole is just fascinating. There's just so much to math, not only just the Fibonacci stuff, to see numbers everywhere in nature. It's great stuff. And I admire pretty much anyone who does that. I like listening to dumbed down talks about science and math. But what I love about math and science in general is the order, right? The structure of it, the logic of it, how everything kind of makes sense. Even the theoretical stuff, you can kind of glean. You may not know all the technical stuff. You may not know the terminology, whether that's on purpose or just for the sake of the fact that it's the language of their field. But because of the order, because of the structure, even non-math people can smell BS if there is any to be smelled, right? So that's the great thing about math, is the order, the structure, the logic. And so I thought about pursuing it, but my own racial identity issues took over my life, and so I had to pursue that. But that idea of a formula stayed with me, and formulas not only in math, but in life. And I guess we don't talk about formulas in life, we talk about life principles. And we use these principles that we choose for ourselves as a way of working out problems that we have, right? So if we have any kind of problem, right? So it's not just employment or financial, but it's moral, right? It can be leisure, it can be life decisions. What principle do we use that we make these decisions? And most people don't really think about it. I go out of my way to challenge, I used to challenge students to think of a life formula to guide, and for a lot of people, they have one, they just never really articulated it. And so I said, it's a lifelong process of banging out your life principle. So why not just put it in the front part of your brain and just kind of work on it, kick it around, see if it performs in the way that it's supposed to. Does it help you when you are at a crisis in your life, when there's a major issue that you have to get through? Does your life principle help you in dealing with that, or does it fail? So for me, I would look for a good formula, right? So what is a principle through which that I can evaluate everything that's going on around me, myself, and therefore try to figure out what would be good choices for me. And just so you know, I think I told you in the last episode, I think that I was a preacher. So that math also forced me to have to re-examine everything that I thought I believed in. So it was a very challenging thing, right? In other words, I had to reconcile everything I was studying in the university with what I was learning at a church. Then I had a professor in grad school who tied philosophy uh, with math, right? And he said, sort of very matter of factly, that philosophy is just simply math in words, right? So you got all these numbers, you got all this stuff going on in the math side of the world. And then you have these philosophers and humanities people translating all of those words into philosophy. So Socrates is basic arithmetic, Spinoza was geometry, process philosophy is based on calculus. And he went into more detail, of course. Um, and at the time, well, my dad was a philosophy PhD. And, he always had an edge on me when it came to debate and arguments. And so hearing that and realizing that math, uh, you know, is basically the symbolic philosophy, it was a way for me to sort of catch up, right? It was a shortcut to try to, get my head around the things that my father was saying. And so since I was already struggling and wrestling with all these ideas, when my professor said that, it clicked for me. And so I realized that when I would debate or get into an argument or a discussion with someone, that they were operating on a principle, whether they realized it or not, that they were, excuse me, they were using some sort of principle that was based on a premise, right? And so then all you had to do is figure out, oh, okay, what are the moves this person is going to try to make in this discussion? And it, you know, I don't know, the kinds of discussions that I get into for one reason or another, I don't know why, but people always want to try to beat me in an argument. I don't know why, right? I just basically just listen all the time, but people sort of come at me. And so generally all I do is listen. And what I listen for is a point or a statement that they are asserting. And then I try to figure out what they are assuming is true. And sometimes you can get that by asking a question or two. And once you have those 2 points, then you pretty much know every single move that they are going to make. It's like a vector. If you know a little bit from math, if you have a starting point, the premise, and then you have a single point of their argument, you can draw a vector, right? So their assumptions are the starting point, and then you just draw a line out to one of the things that a statement that they made. And now all you have to do is consider that line and use or vector, excuse me, and then you know pretty much all the points that they're going to make. Now, if you walk in on a conversation and you just hear 2 points, right, that someone is making, then you can pretty much go backwards and try to figure out what their premise is, what their assumption is. And then you can move forward and you can say, oh, okay, I know what you're going to say as well. And very, very math, right? So if you know the formula of a line, right, or the idea of a line, if you know 2 points, then you know what the line is, right? 2 points is all you need to know what the formula for the line is. And I realized that this works perfectly in debates. And so because you know what someone is going to say or what they're moving towards, even if they don't, then all you have to do is kind of change the argument a bit, right? So in other words, if winning the argument by defeating the logic of your opponent is all that you're going for, and that's all I really wanted to do, right? Because I didn't have anything to assert. All you have to do is make a point that doesn't fit on the line, right? And so they can't explain it. It doesn't fit whatever formula that they were trying to use, whatever principle they were trying to assert on you. And then you just walk away, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, see, yeah, your argument doesn't really hold up all that well. At least that's the way I would do it, right? But just because I had fun with math and I realized that philosophy was related to math in that way. The great thing about this too is you can judge consistency. You can find contradictions. You can see non sequiturs, right? Missing steps or a jump in the argument. So it looks like, oh, okay, so I see what you did there. But sometimes there's a missing step, and the missing step is actually a change in the principle, right? So non sequitur, right? It didn't follow. Like, so a conclusion doesn't follow the points that you were making. And so once you realize that, then it's a lot harder for someone to steamroll over you, to force ideas upon you. You can judge the legitimacy of the argument that is being made. And that was an extreme benefit for me. Also, when I was teaching, I don't know, 15 years ago, I made predictions. I would say, eventually people are going to say this. So at the time, what is it? Austin Powers was one of the popular movies. And I said, if you notice a lot of the humor in Austin Powers, you can't make certain jokes, right? You can't make colored jokes. You can't make jokes about race. So what do you have to do? You have to make jokes about fat people, obese people. You have to make jokes about small people, right? I don't know if little people might be the word that used to be one way. Dwarfs, right? So basically, people who had the condition of dwarfism, I guess. So that you could make jokes about that. But then I said, one day they're going to get politically active. They're going to politicize their racial group, right? And then make it off limits, right? And so now they become politically mobilized. And so you can't make jokes about that protected group. And sure enough, a couple of years later, that's what started to happen, right? And so once you understand how people are thinking, how they're working, then you can make reasonable predictions of what they will say. So even when people say, oh, no one is saying that, no one is saying this, so one example would be gun control. So people would say, no one is trying to take away your guns. Yeah, yes, you are. You're not saying it now, but you will eventually. And that's pretty obvious. And so people who are sort of caught up with the virtue signaling, moralistic, authoritarian, do what I tell you to do, they don't necessarily see it. Maybe the people who are pulling their strings, their leaders, the people who are feeding them the lines that they are going to then scream at the top of their lungs in your face, they know. But then all of their underlings, they don't necessarily know. And the feeling is that they don't, right? They really only believe the moment, which is why I thought it was so curious that for a while, a lot of students, they said that their principle was living in the moment. And I thought it was because there were a couple of movie stars who sort of podcasts were sort of vlogging. At the time, it was called vlogging. They were videotaping their journey through cancer treatment. The star from Spartacus, Andy Whitfield, I think was his name. He did that. Excuse me. And he was saying that his philosophy right now is taking it day by day, living in the moment. And that became sort of very much of a fad. So, but having that principle, living in the moment, allows other people to be able to take several steps ahead of you, right? And then tell you, oh no, this is living in the moment, when in reality, they're sort of nudging you and guiding you in a particular direction, but you don't see it because you're only fixated on the moment. So when I was working a lot of this stuff out, I was also leading a youth group at a church, 7th grade to, well, even into college students, right? And so one thing that a lot of them didn't realize is that I remember how I was when I was a kid, and I was also the kid that always tried to find trouble. I didn't actually get into trouble, but I always entertained the idea of getting into trouble. And so now that you're older, and if you can remember how you were when you were younger, you have that humility to be able to do that. You can see and understand the behavior of a lot of the younger kids in the church. And so I would basically tell them, "Oh, I see you're doing this now. You're into that." And they're like, "You don't know that." And I said, "Well, yeah, you can. I can guess it," which freaked them out a little bit. And a lot of them didn't believe me. And so then the show Numbers, NUMB3RS, happened. It ran for 6 seasons, and it was a show all about math and how they were doing predictive models using math and all this other kind of stuff. And I forced everyone to watch it with me. Season 1, we went through the whole entire season, binged watched it together at a retreat. And then they believed me, right? And they were like, "Oh," and I said, "See, that's what I'm doing." Right. That is the math, it's the game theory, it's the group dynamic stuff. And then you can kind of make reasonable predictions as to what someone is really thinking. This is what they say. If they say this is what they actually mean. This is what they're trying to hide, et cetera, et cetera. So I explained it all. And of course, what happened was everyone stopped talking, right? Which is not, you didn't want that either. So everyone realized that anything they said would give away whatever they were thinking, whatever they were planning. And so they all stopped talking. It was disheartening a little bit. But in any case, they saw just how effective it was and how much it was really accurate in predicting certain, I guess they tried it on each other. But in any case, so some other examples you can see today, if someone is really pro-America, right, the news would never lie to me. My favorite politician would never lie to me. That means nothing America does is bad. And so now we can justify all sorts of bad foreign policy. People who are actually trying to help us are our enemies, like Julian Assange, Edward Snowden. If you can, another example would be if you can establish a minority status, then you can politicize, get in politically active to seek protected status. And we can see this now happening on steroids everywhere you look. And so it becomes very difficult to know what is okay to say, what's okay to do. If Trump is bad, then everything anyone says he did, well, it must be true. And so he should go to jail for it, right? And so you can kind of see, if you even just casually, if their premise, based on their premise, what it is they're more likely to believe and how they're going to, what they're going to say. Now, okay, so that's the phenomena we live in today, and it's kind of depressing. When I come off of Twitter X, it's you got to detox for a little bit, right? Trying to find engagement somewhere, but the place where you got to go is just right now is pretty toxic. But it shouldn't matter what other people think, because they should not be able to control you. At least that's what was true 40 years ago. But now it matters, right? People can force you to do things. They will curse at you. The whole masking thing, the forced vaccinations, all this stuff, while at the same time giving immunity, right? No liability at all to the drug companies. It was just all so crazy. But what's so crazy is what is with the advantage that we have to protect ourselves moving forward is that because of the way of analyzing what people say is pretty much set in human behavior. I mean, it's rarely wrong. And even if it is off, you just have to make an adjustment. There's other factors that you have to take into consideration that you didn't before. But like I said, it helps you to predict and anticipate what people are going to say, not necessarily what they're going to do, right? That's a totally different conversation, but and that's where the game theory comes in. But anyway, but if you listen carefully to what people say, and if what they're trying to push is a reduction of choice, you can almost guarantee that they themselves do not follow it, right? So human beings naturally seek more choices, more variety of choices, right? And so if certain holier than thou, I have the authority, I'm going to force you to live in the way that I think is right. So it's a reduction of choice. It's a narrowing of the possibilities that you can explore for your life choices. If someone is doing that to you, then the person who's saying that, guaranteed, right? It's just a matter of time to figure it out, is someone who is probably violating their own principle right now, right? Because it's a reduction of choice, right? And that is so not natural to human beings. And we saw this with Governor Newsom over in California. One thing that I used to do is I used to, as my background images for Zoom meetings, I would have articles of political hypocrisy, right? Politicians that violated their own Cervasis regulations. I would have that in the background, and they were the biggest preachers of all of these safety measures. But again, since it's reduction of choice, it was just a matter of time for people to catch them violating it. Okay. And this is because, so what does it take for people to change their principle, to change their math, if you will, right? So if their math is bad, then what would get them to change their math, right? To change their principle? Well, when it gets too expensive, right? When it's too expensive to maintain certain beliefs, then people are going to change their beliefs. Culture is like this. We've talked about this before, but when different cultures meet each other and they interact with each other, people who are not invested in one or the other culture, what they're going to do is compare, and they're going to see which cultural practices are lower cost, which ones are easier to maintain. And this is when you have that reaction of people talking about multiculturalism, where we have to preserve cultural practices, right? Because they see that their practices, what they value, what they treasure, is too expensive. And so in order to protect it, they have to double down. They have to say, no one's allowed to do it. Only we are allowed to do it. Things like that. Now, what messed everything up, of course, is the Federal Reserve. So there's just so much currency, liquidity floating around in the economy that is harder to see what is expensive and what is not. Like when the government is mailing checks to you to stay at home, then the cost of staying at home and not working is hidden, right? And so it's delayed. You don't see it until now, right? With rising prices, even more money printing, bank failures, all of this other kind of stuff, right? So that's that. So knowing that everyone else has these principles that they're operating on, they're using math to either hide it or to try to see if it works or not. For me, I see all of this going on, and I use my principles to sift through the information to know what is misinformation, what is disinformation, what is bad information, and then what might be better choices for myself, for my family, for my church, for the people that I know, the students that I teach, so then when they start talking about UFOs or Trump indictments, it's a kind of a distraction, right? And so instead of getting caught up in the whole UFO thing, then I ask myself, what do I need to do to prepare for CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, things like this. And so you can use your principle that's hopefully founded in good logic, good math, to figure out what are the best choices for you. And I think eventually, no matter what, if you are diligent and you're honest to try to find what is the best principle for yourself, you'll do all right. It'll take you to where you need to go. That's it for this episode. I will talk to you in the next one.